Well, protests have erupted across the West Bank following the unprecedented Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. Palestinian authorities are considering ways to respond to those attacks, and Hamas is threatening revenge. But Israel is defending those airstrikes. Zhang's away with that story.
After the Israeli airstrikes, the West Bank and Gaza both declared 3 days of mourning for those Palestinians killed during the attacks. Meanwhile, Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad called for an emergency meeting of the Council of Ministers in the West Bank city of Ramallah. As the leaders were discussing how to politically and diplomatically react to the Israeli strikes, protesters marched through the center of Ramallah. Demonstrations have also been held in the West Bank cities of Nablus and Nebron. Protesters are calling for solidarity with the people of Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas leaders have threatened to take action.
We will not compromise or back down on our religion or cause.
Facing growing international condemnation, Israel is defending the airstrikes. They insist they have no option but to retaliate against the rocket attacks by Gaza militants.
There is a time for a truce and a time for fighting, and now is the time for fighting.
Past Israeli incursions and airstrikes have not halted rocket barrages from Gaza. Since the ceasefire with Hamas expired a week ago, some 200 mortars and rockets have been launched into Israel, and pressure has been mounting in Israel for the military to take action. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has admitted that the military campaign may last for a few days, and the operation will not be easy. Zheng Sui, CCTV.
Well, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is calling for international support and has demanded an urgent meeting of Arab foreign ministers to address the Israeli attacks.
Now we want quickly an Arab foreign ministers meeting. We would assume that the foreign ministers would come and meet and take the necessary action, and if found necessary, to have an Arab summit.
Abbas made those remarks after he had talks with King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. The talks focused on the Gaza attacks, and the Saudi leader promised to call U.S. President George W. Bush and other leaders, asking them to push Israel to halt its operation. Meanwhile, Arab foreign ministers are set to meet in Cairo on Sunday to seek a common position on these attacks. Libya, the only Arab country on the UN Security Council, will seek an urgent meeting of the Council in New York over the issue. Well, in Lebanon, thousands of angry Palestinian refugees flooded the streets of their refugee camps across the country on Saturday, protesting Israel's attacks on Gaza. Protesters blocked roads and burned tires while chanting anti-Israeli slogans in several camps. Lebanon is the host to about 400,000 Palestinian refugees. Shiite group Hezbollah also condemned the attacks and says Hamas would be victorious against Israel. In Cairo, hundreds of Egyptians protested. The head of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, Mehdi Mohammed Akif, wants Israel's ambassador to Egypt expelled and the abrogation of Egypt's peace agreement with Israel. Egypt's foreign minister has summoned the ambassador. Well, meanwhile, Palestinians have also won Iran's support. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad condemned the unprecedented wave of airstrikes on Gaza. He says the Arab Foreign Ministers' Council meeting will take place soon, and he hopes Arab leaders will take more of a stand. China is voicing its concern about Israel's military action in Gaza and is urging both Israel and Hamas to exercise restraint to solve their dispute through dialogue. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Qin Gang made those comments following the intensification of animosity in Gaza. Qin is condemning the Israeli offensives that have left many civilians dead. He says China is opposed to any attempt to resolve disputes by violence. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, meanwhile, is blaming Hamas for breaking the ceasefire with Israel and for renewing violence in Gaza. She's also calling for the immediate restoration of a ceasefire between both sides. The White House wants Israel to avoid civilian casualties during its reprisal strikes against those Hamas targets.
Israel has said that they are targeting security and headquarters elements of Hamas. We have asked and urged Israel to avoid civilian casualties. We want the ceasefire to be restored, but we understand that Israel is reacting to the hundreds of rockets that have been fired upon the innocent people of Israel over the last few days.